The smoke from Vidia 4's battlefield clung to the air like a living thing, choking the horizon and dulling the twin suns that burned overhead. It smelled of scorched metal, plasma burns, and blood, an acrid mix that turned the ruins into a graveyard of twisted steel and shattered crystal. The alien structures, once elegant arcs of translucent material, lay in jagged shards that glimmered faintly in the dim light. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it looked like the death mask of a world torn apart by War Staff Sergeant Jake Sullivan picked his way through the wreckage, his boots crunching on fragments of alien architecture mixed with the blackened remains of human ordnance. His combat armor was scratched and scorched from hours of firefights, and exhaustion lined his face, but his posture remained unbowed. His rescue unit moved in a tight pattern behind him, the kind of formation that had become muscle memory after 3 long years of relentless conflict. They had cleared 7 sectors already that morning, finding only silence and the broken bodies of soldiers from both sides. This war no longer distinguished between hero or villain, only survivors and the dead. Sector 7 clear. Corporal Martinez reported over the comm, his voice flat. No survivors human or Catherian. Jake acknowledged with a curt nod, scanning the uneven terrain with a practiced eye. Keep moving. Check every pocket. We don't leave anyone behind, enemy or not. It was more than protocol. It was principle. Saving lives was the last part of this war that still made sense. Private. Chun's voice cut through the static with a sharp edge of urgency. Sarge, I've got movement here. Looks like someone's trapped under debris. Jake turned immediately, climbing over a pile of smoldering wreckage toward Chun's location. The private stood beside what might once have been a Catherian defensive structure, now reduced to jagged beams of crystal and molten metal. Beneath the wreckage, Jake spotted a flash of pale blue-gray skin and the faint rise and fall of breathing. Human or Catherian? Jake asked, crouching low to assess the scene. Catherian. Female, I think, Chun answered. Armor's banged up bad, but she's alive. Jake dropped to one knee, his tactical mind taking in the details. The alien soldier had fallen in a protective stance, as if shielding someone or something when the structure collapsed. Her armor wasn't like the standard Catherian issue they had seen before. It shimmered faintly, flowing across her body as if it were alive, adjusting itself even now to support her breathing. This wasn't just battlefield tech, it was something far more advanced, something personal. Pulses steady, breathing regular, Jake muttered, checking vitals with his scanner. Possible concussion, but she make it. He glanced at Chun. We're getting her out. Chun hesitated. Sarge, you know the brass won't like us dragging a Catherian into camp, especially not one who might be military intelligence. Jake's voice was firm. The brass can file their complaints later. Our job is rescue. We don't leave people to die. It took them 20 minutes to clear the rubble without worsening her injuries. As Jake lifted her into a fireman's carry, he was struck by how oddly heavy she felt for someone with such an elegant, almost ethereal frame. The Catherians were tall, their features elongated and refined, their skin glowing faintly as though lit from within. This woman was no exception. Even caked with ash and blood, there was a calm serenity about her face, as if she had been carved from the light itself. Never seen armor like this, Chun muttered, examining the shifting plates. Across her back. It's organic. Grows around her like a second skin. Jake didn't answer. His attention was on the unconscious woman, on the strange mix of fragility and power she embodied. She looked so out of place here, surrounded by the ruins of war. Whoever she was, he couldn't shake the feeling that her survival mattered more. Then they knew that as they approached the perimeter, Martinez's voice came through the comm tense. Sarge, we've got Catherian search teams sweeping the area. Their patterns, weird. Feels like they're looking for something specific. Jake adjusted his grip on the alien soldier, a sharp unease prickling at the back of his neck. Not something, someone, and I'm betting it's her. The ruins of Vidia 4 stretched out before them, silent except for the faint hum of distant engines. But in that silence, Jake could already sense the storm building, the kind of storm that starts with a single, unexpected rescue. The medical tents of Forward Base Epsilon stood like pale ghosts against the blackened landscape of Vidia 4, their fabric walls stained with smoke and streaked with drying mud. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic, scorched metal, and the faint iron tang of blood. Every stretcher was full, every medic moving like clockwork, trying to hold back the tide of death that always followed battle. Staff Sergeant Jake Sullivan ducked through the flaps with his unconscious burden, the weight of her armor and her silence pressing against his back like a physical reminder of the decision he had made. "Put her here?" barked Dr. Elizabeth Santos, the chief medical officer. Her dark eyes flickered over the alien form without hesitation, but her voice carried a tension that made every medic in the tent pause. The Kathandrian soldier, if she was just a soldier, lay motionless on the cot, her silver-blue armor rippling faintly, as though alive and responding to the unfamiliar environment. Major Harrison, the commanding officer of the unit, appeared from the back of the tent, his boots crunching on grit and broken glass. "What the hell is that, Sullivan?" His voice was low and sharp, the tone of someone already preparing for a court-martial. "She's a survivor," Jake said firmly, stripping off his gloves and scanning her vitals again. "Trapped under rubble in Sector 7. We don't leave survivors behind." Harrison's gaze narrowed. "Survivors are one thing. Enemy combatants are another. We don't have the facilities to treat her, and we're not in the business of giving aid to the people shooting at us." Jake stepped closer, not intimidated. "She's alive. She's wounded. That's all that matters. Or are we just going to decide who gets mercy based on the color of their skin?" The tent went quiet except for the hiss of a portable respirator. Even Dr. Santos looked up from her work, clearly curious to see how far Jake was willing to push the argument. "Orders are clear," Harrison said at last, though his tone was softer. "Enemy combatants are to be detained and interrogated, not patched up and sent home with a care package." Jake's voice dropped, but it carried the weight of someone who had seen too many meaningless deaths. "Sir, with all due respect, this isn't about orders. This is about being human." A long silence followed. Finally, Harrison waved a hand toward Dr. Santos. "Fine, check her vitals. Keep her stable. But no one touches that armor until I say so. And Sullivan, if this decision comes back to bite us, it's your neck on the line." "Understood," Jake replied, though his attention was already back on the woman lying before him, her skin, faintly luminescent under the harsh tent lights, looked too perfect to belong to someone who had just crawled through hell. There were no burns, no deep cuts, only bruises and faint hairline fractures. The armor clung to her like liquid metal, subtly shifting as if aware of the medical instruments hovering nearby. When Santos tried to cut away part of the material to check for internal injuries, the armor hardened, its surface glowing faintly with a protective pulse. "What the hell is this stuff?" muttered one of the medics, backing away as the organic material seemed to respond to their presence. "It's alive," Jake said quietly, studying the patterns that shimmered across the plates. "Not just armor. It's bonded to her somehow." As if hearing him, the Kathandrian woman stirred, her breath quickening. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes like molten gold eyes that locked directly onto Jake's as though she had known him forever. The tent seemed to shrink, all noise fading into a strange, tense silence. "You," she whispered, her voice carrying a melodic resonance unlike anything Jake had ever heard. The single word made his skin prickle. Her gaze didn't waver. "You saved your queen." The words struck the tent like a plasma blast. Santos froze, scalpel in hand. Harrison's head snapped around, disbelief etched on his face. Jake blinked. Stunned, certain he had misheard her. "I'm sorry, what?" Her voice was stronger now, though still laced with exhaustion. "You saved your queen." Jake stared at her, his brain scrambling for logic. "Ma'am, you've taken a hit to the head." "You might be confused." "I am not confused," she said, and the authority in her tone made everyone instinctively straighten. "I am Queen Lyeli Kathandra of the Catherian Stellar Empire." The silence that followed was heavier than any artillery blast. Jake glanced around. Every medic, every soldier in earshot was staring at them with wide eyes, as if the air itself had shifted. "You're a queen?" Jake asked, his voice almost incredulous. She inclined her head slightly, even lying on a cot, her movements graceful, commanding. "I was leading the defense of the Crystal Reach when your forces struck. My people were retreating, and I stayed to shield them. You pulled me from the ruins." "That's impossible," Harrison muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Royalty doesn't fight on the front lines." Lyeli's eyes hardened. "A throne means nothing if its ruler is not willing to bleed with their people." The statement, spoken with quiet dignity, left Jake speechless. He found himself studying her face, the perfect symmetry, the faint shimmering of her skin, and he realized something unsettling. She wasn't lying. This wasn't arrogance or delusion. This was truth. Outside, the low thrum of engines cut through the tension. Martinez's voice came over the comm, sharp and uneasy. "Sarge, we've got Catherian search parties moving in fast. Pattern suggests they're looking for something, maybe someone." Jake's jaw tightened as he looked down at the queen he had unknowingly carried from the battlefield. "They're looking for her," he said under his breath, "and whatever's coming." This just got complicated. The tension in forward base Epsilon thickened like the smoke that still drifted from the scorched horizon. News of the alien woman's claim had already spread beyond the medical tent, whispered by wounded soldiers and wide-eyed medics as though they had witnessed something otherworldly. Jake Sullivan stood near the entrance, his pulse still racing from the words that had shattered the fragile routine of the camp. "You saved your queen." Those words haunted him now. He replayed the moment in his head, her golden eyes locking onto his as if she saw more than just a soldier, as if she recognized something in him that he didn't yet understand. The base had survived 3 days of fighting, 3 days of endless shelling and skirmishes that left the landscape a wasteland. But nothing in Jake's combat experience had prepared him for this. Major Harrison stormed into the tent like a thundercloud, his jaw tight. He'd already received encrypted messages from command demanding a full report on the Catherian asset. Asset. That was what they were calling her now. Not a queen, not even a prisoner, just a piece of leverage in a war that neither side seemed willing to end. "Sergeant Sullivan," Harrison said sharply, his voice cutting through the low murmur of medics. "Step away from her. She's not your responsibility anymore." Jake glanced at Queen Lyeli Kathandra. She had managed to sit up on the cot despite Dr. Santos's protests, her posture effortlessly regal, her gaze steady. Her presence seemed to command the room without a word, and even hardened soldiers found themselves stealing glances at her. Jake had seen leaders before generals, commanders, politicians, but none of them had this kind of presence. "With respect, sir," Jake sighed. "She's still injured. Until she's stable, I'm not leaving." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "That's an order, Sullivan. Do I need to remind you what's at stake here? If she really is who she claims to be, she's not just a survivor anymore. She's a bargaining chip. We can end this war with her." Lyeli tilted her head slightly, her luminous skin rippling with faint patterns that almost looked like living light. You would use me as leverage? Like a weapon? Harrison didn't answer directly. He turned to Dr. Santos. Keep her alive and contained. And for God's sake, someone strip that armor and find out what makes it tick. Good luck with that, Santos muttered, running a scanner across the plates of Lyeli's armor. It's like trying to scan a living organism. It's actively resisting my tools. The Queen's gaze shifted back to Jake, and for a moment, everything else in the tent seemed to fade. Do you see? She asked softly, her voice carrying that melodic resonance that made every syllable feel like a secret. This war is not about survival anymore. It is about control, about who can hold the right hostage. Jake didn't have an answer, but deep down, he knew she was right outside. The sound of vehicles and distant shouts cut through the still air. Martinez's voice came through the comms, tense and urgent. Sarge, you need to see this. We've got Catherian units on the move fast and coordinated. They're scanning every wreck, every crater. I think they're looking for her. Jake turned back to Harrison. Sir, they're not searching for survivors. They're hunting her specifically. If they find out we're holding her, they won't find out, Harrison interrupted, though his tone was less confident than his words. We'll move her to the underground bunker. Lyeli's golden eyes hardened, and the lights of the tent seemed to flicker faintly, as if reacting to her mood. You think my people will not know? They will. And if they believe I have been captured, they will unleash everything they have left. Vidia 4 will become a graveyard for both sides. Jake felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He knew the Catherians fought with precision and discipline, but if they launched a retaliation out of desperation, the cost would be catastrophic. Sir, Jake said carefully, maybe we should think about negotiating before this gets out of hand. Negotiate? Harrison's voice dripped with disbelief. With her? She's the enemy. No, Jake said, glancing at Lyeli. She's the only one who might stop this before it spirals out of control. Before Harrison could respond, the alarm klaxons howled. A low, throbbing boom rolled across the base, shaking the ground and rattling the tent poles. Soldiers outside shouted orders, scrambling for defensive positions. The comms crackled with Martinez's frantic voice. Incoming fire, unknown origin, not standard Catherian patterns. Something's off. Jake's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his rifle, turning to Lyeli. She was already on her feet, moving, with the poise of someone who'd spent years in combat, not the protected life of a ruler. Her golden eyes burned like twin suns. They're not my soldiers, she said quietly, her tone carrying an ominous certainty. Whoever is attacking, they're here for me. Another explosion tore through the outer perimeter, sending a shockwave that knocked medics off their feet. Harrison cursed, his voice tight with fear and frustration. Get her to the bunker now. Sullivan, you're with me. Jake looked at Lyeli and felt something shift deep inside him, a clarity sharper than any order he'd ever followed. He knew, without question, that if they handed her over to whoever was coming, it wouldn't just be the Queen they'd lose. It would be the last chance for something better than this endless war. Ma'am, he said to Lyeli, his tone quiet, but resolute. Stay close to me. We'll get through this. She looked at him, and a faint smile touched her lips. The kind of smile that didn't just show gratitude but trust that felt heavier than any weapon Jake had ever carried. The ground shook again. And in that chaos, Jake realized that whatever storm was about to break would test not just his loyalty as a soldier, but his very sense of who he was. The night sky over Vidia 4 burned with unnatural fire. The bombardment outside forward base, Epsilon, had escalated into a chaos that neither side's standard tactics could explain. Plasma bolts carved glowing arcs across the horizon, and somewhere, Beyond the perimeter, the shriek of engines signaled the arrival of troops moving too fast and too precisely to be ordinary soldiers. Jake Sullivan pressed his back to a wall inside the base's eastern corridor, his rifle gripped tight. The ground trembled again, a deep shuddering rumble that made the floor plates hum beneath his boots. Through the thin cumline chatter, he heard the fragmented panic of soldiers trying to piece together what was happening. Unmarked hostiles, black armor, Teklik's hybrid human-Catherian mix, static swallowed the rest. That detail alone sent a chill down Jake's spine. No standard faction would field gear like that. Whoever these attackers were, they weren't fighting for peace or survival. They were here for something else. For someone else. He glanced back at Queen Lyeli Kathandra. The Catherian ruler moved with an unsettling calm, as though her body had learned to hold command in every gesture, even in the middle of a storm. Her shimmering armor flowed back into place, sealing itself as though sensing the danger. A thin line of light traced her shoulders and spine, the living plates flexing. Like a predator ready to strike. "They are coming for me," she said, her voice low but carrying a certainty that silenced everything around them. "Not for this base, not for your soldiers. For me," Jake swallowed. "Then they're going to have to get through me first." Lyeli tilted her head slightly, golden eyes fixed on him. "You say that like a vow, Sergeant Sullivan." "Because it is," he replied without hesitation. "We don't leave anyone behind. And I sure as hell don't leave someone I just risked my life to save." Before she could respond, the outer blast doors screeched as the first wave of mercenaries forced their way inside. They weren't Catherian soldiers, nor were they wearing the patchwork gear of raiders. Their black, featureless helmets reflected the lights of the corridor like mirrors. Their weapons were a hybrid of both species' technology plasma coils interlaced with kinetic accelerators. Whoever built them had spared no expense. These weren't soldiers. They were assassins. "Stay low," Jake ordered, pivoting to fire. His rifle spat bursts of controlled energy, the recoil pounding against his shoulder. 2 mercenaries dropped, their armor sizzling with scorch marks, but the rest advanced without hesitation. Lyeli moved forward, not back. In one smooth motion, her armor reconfigured around her wrist, producing a weapon unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It wasn't forged metal. It looked grown, crystalline and alive, glowing faintly as she pressed her hand into its grip. When she fired, it released a burst of light so pure and concentrated that the mercenaries scattered like insects caught under a magnifying glass. "Holy hell," Jake muttered, ducking behind a shattered barricade. "You carry that thing everywhere?" "Only when I'm trying not to die," she replied dryly, her voice oddly calm. The firefight turned brutal and close range. Jake and Lyeli moved as if they had trained together for years, covering each other's flanks instinctively. She was fast, impossibly fast, her movements smooth and deliberate. Jake found himself thinking that if she really was the queen of an empire, she was unlike any ruler humanity had ever known. She fought like someone who had bled 100 times for the people she led. More incoming. Chen's voice shouted through the comms, "Sarge, they've breached the western wing." "We're getting pinned down," Jake cursed. "We need to fall back to the armory. We can't hold them off out here." Lyeli nodded once, understanding without hesitation. "Lead the way." They ran through smoke-filled corridors as alarms howled and red warning lights pulsed like the heartbeat of a dying beast. At every turn, the mercenaries were waiting, forcing them to fight their way through. Jake took point, his rifle blazing, while Lyeli's energy weapon cut down anyone who tried to flank them. By the time they reached the armory, the doors were half broken, pocked with scorch marks. Inside, the room was chaos. Shelves of weapons were overturned, crates of ammunition scattered, as if someone had already tried and failed to hold this ground. "This is insane," Jake muttered, scanning the damage. "This isn't just an attack. They're trying to wipe out every record of what happened here." Lyeli's gaze swept over the ruined room, her face set like stone. "If they erase this base, they erase me. And if they erase me, the war continues exactly as they want. Then we don't let them erase anything," Jake said. Lyeli's hand hovered near the central console of the armory, her fingers brushing over a control panel with a confidence that surprised him. "You don't trust your leaders," she said quietly, "and I cannot fully trust mine. But together, maybe we can send a truth neither side can silence." Jake frowned. "What truth?" "That I'm alive. That I'm willing to speak for peace," she said, her voice steady but burning with something fierce. "And that your people, are not the monsters my war council claims." Her words hung there, almost too heavy to answer. Jake glanced toward the battered door where the thud of mercenary boots grew closer. "If we're going to broadcast anything, we'd better do it fast." Lyeli turned to him, her luminous gaze unwavering. "Then fight with me, Jake Sullivan. Not as human or Kathandrian, as two soldiers who know there's something worth saving." For a heartbeat, he stared at her, feeling the strange gravity of her presence, the weight of a leader who had chosen to fight beside her people rather than above them. Then he nodded. "Let's make them listen." The next explosion rattled the walls, and the mercenaries surged forward, forcing them to dive for cover. Their firefight became a storm of light and steel, the room filling with smoke and fire. Jake's rifle burned hot in his hands as he shouted over the chaos. "We've got one shot at this. Keep them off me while I patch into the array." "I'll hold them," Lyeli said, and for a moment, her voice sounded less like a queen's and more like a warrior's oath. And as Jake slammed the control panel open and began overriding the cumlocks, he realized something that sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't just another battle. This was the turning point. If they failed, the war would swallow everything. But if they succeeded, nothing on either side would ever be the same again. The armory was alive with chaos, every sound amplified by the enclosed metal walls. Sparks rained from shattered consoles, mixing with the smoke of overheated plasma coils and the acrid tang of burning polymers. The mercenaries were relentless, moving with the precision of a single organism, their unmarked armor reflecting the flicker of emergency lights. Each footstep and blast of fire drew them closer, a tide of black steel and hybrid weaponry meant to erase everything Jake Sullivan and Queen Lyeli Kathandra stood for in that moment. Jake crouched behind a stack of munitions crates, rifle pressed tight to his shoulder. His pulse hammered in sync with the gunfire as he laid down suppressing bursts to push the mercenaries back. Each shot burned bright, lighting up the dim armory in flashes like stuttering lightning. "Chun," he barked. "Over the cum. We need that west entrance sealed now." "We're trying, Sarge," Chen's voice crackled back, ragged with tension. "They're cutting through the outer bulkheads." "Won't hold long." Jake's gaze flicked toward Lyeli. She stood at the far end of the room, her silhouette framed by the central communications array. The console glowed faintly as she interfaced with it, her fingers moving over the alien and human tech as though it were born from her own mind. The living plates of her armor shifted with subtle pulses of light, humming with power every time she brushed the controls. She looked less like a queen and more like some ancient war spirit, her presence commanding even as bullets and plasma bolts scorched the air around her. "Their jamming standard comes," she said, her melodic voice cutting through the din with unshakable clarity. "Whoever orchestrated this attack knew your communication protocols and mine. But I can bypass the interference if I integrate my armor's neural systems with your signal boosters." Jake leaned out from cover, firing a precise shot that dropped a mercenary trying to flank them from the east. "Do it, but if you fry." Your systems were dead." Her golden eyes glimmered with something like defiance. "If I do nothing, we are already dead." The room shook violently as another explosion rocked the outer corridor. The reinforced doors began to buckle, the hiss of cutting torches already audible. Jake sprinted to the array, skidding behind the console. "What do you need?" "Your authorization code," she said, her voice sharp with focus. "This array won't respond to me alone. I need you to override the human security lock." Jake hesitated for a heartbeat. If he gave her his code, she would have access to everything: battle plans, troop deployments, encrypted networks. The kind of intel that could end the war or escalate it beyond control. But when he looked into her eyes, there was no deceit there, only a quiet, fierce determination that matched his own. "Fine," he muttered, keying in his code. "But if you sell me out, I'll come back and haunt you." Lyeli tilted her head slightly, and despite the chaos, a faint smile curved her lips. "I don't betray those who risk their lives for me." The system hummed as the array powered up. Lyeli stepped closer, her hand resting on the console. A low harmonic resonance filled the room as her armor connected, threads of living light weaving between her fingertips and the interface. Jake stared, momentarily awed as alien technology meshed seamlessly with human hardware, the lights of both systems pulsing in sync like a heartbeat. "We have a channel," she said softly, but before she could begin, a barrage of plasma fire ripped through the eastern barricade, sending shrapnel across the floor. Jake tackled her instinctively, shielding her from the blast. He felt the heat of the explosion scorch his armor, the searing sting of fragments biting into his arm. "You're bleeding," Lyeli said, her hand brushing the blood on his sleeve. "Doesn't matter." Jake grunted, forcing himself back to his feet. "Get the message out." The mercenaries pushed through the breach, a wall of black armor advancing with deadly precision. Chun and Martinez fought like demons, but they were being pushed back step by step. Jake slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle and fired, each shot buying Lyeli precious seconds. Then her voice cut through the chaos, amplified by the cum array, carried across every available channel, human, Catherian, and beyond. "This is Queen Lyeli Kathandra of the Catherian Stellar Empire. I speak now to soldiers, civilians, and leaders on both sides of this conflict. I am alive, and I will no longer let this war consume our worlds." The battlefield outside went momentarily quiet, as if the war itself paused to listen. Even the mercenaries hesitated, their faceless helmets turning toward the sound of her voice. "I have seen the truth," she continued, her tone resonating with authority that transcended species. "This war is not being fought by the will of our people, but by those who profit from blood and fear. Extremists from both our nations are here at this very moment, trying to kill me to keep you blind." Jake stepped into view beside her, his rifle at the ready. "This is Staff Sergeant Jake Sullivan, Human Colonial Forces. I saved her life because that's what we're supposed to do, save lives. Doesn't matter if you're human or Catherian. If you're breathing and you're bleeding, you deserve a chance to live." The cum array crackled with static as the mercenaries regrouped, their weapons rising. Lyeli's gaze hardened. "If you believe in peace, in the hope that our children can grow up without this endless cycle of hatred, stand down. Both sides. Lay down your weapons and think. Who gains from your suffering?" Her words were cut short by a deafening blast as the mercenaries made their final push. Jake spun, firing in rapid bursts to hold them back. "We've got seconds before they overrun us." Lyeli didn't flinch. Her hand never left the console as she turned to Jake, her voice calm even in the face of death. "Then we finish this. Now." She leaned closer, her voice low, almost intimate. "If we die here, at least we'll die trying to end something bigger than ourselves." Jake nodded once, a grim smile on his face. Then let's make it count. The doors buckled. Plasma fire tore through the room. The Gamma ray glowed with a brilliant burst of light as Lyeli transmitted the last of her message to every frequency within range. Somewhere far beyond this battlefield, soldiers and civilians were hearing her words and questioning everything. Transmission complete. The console confirmed in a flat mechanical voice. Jake tightened his grip on his rifle and looked at Lyeli. Now we survive. The mercenaries poured into the armory like a wave of black fire. The armory erupted into chaos the moment the blast doors gave way. The mercenaries surged in, black armor gleaming under the flicker of failing lights, their hybrid weapons spitting a deadly mix of plasma bursts and kinetic fire. Jake Sullivan barely had time to dive behind an overturned weapons crate, pulling Queen Lyeli Kathandra down with him as the room exploded in light and sound. Martinez, cover the west flank. Chun, with me. Jake shouted over the roar of gunfire, his voice raw and commanding. His rifle barked in precise bursts, cutting through the haze. Each shot had to count. They were running low on ammo, and this wasn't a fight they could win by holding their ground. Lyeli rose beside him, moving with the effortless grace of a warrior trained to fight and lead. Her armor shifted fluidly, reconfiguring into battle mode as if responding to her pulse. She raised her living weapon, its crystalline surface glowing with a fierce blue radiance. The first volley she fired struck 3 mercenaries at once, the beams slicing through their armor like it was paper. They won't stop, she said, her voice calm but edged with something Jake had never heard from her before: cold certainty. They will kill every one of us just to erase the message we sent. Then we don't let them, Jake replied, his jaw tight. We hold until reinforcements arrive, or until we make it out of here. The words were barely out of his mouth when another explosion shook the walls, sending metal fragments spinning through the air. Chun ducked behind a half-shattered barricade. Sarge, these guys are better than anything we've faced. They move like they've trained together for years. They're not soldiers, Lyeli said, her golden eyes narrowing as she watched the mercenaries advance. They're weapons bought and paid for. No loyalty, no cause. Just profit. The mercenaries launched smoke canisters into the armory, flooding the room with choking gray fog. Jake yanked down his visor, switching to infrared as the enemy began. Their push. The smog transformed the fight into a shadow war, red heat signatures darting and weaving like ghosts. Push left. Jake barked, and he and Lyeli moved together, their coordination almost uncanny. He covered her flank as she vaulted over a crate, her weapon flaring with another searing pulse of energy that melted through a mercenary's helmet. The man dropped. Without a sound, for a moment their eyes met across the haze. There was no time for words, but in that instant, Jake knew they were more than allies. They were 2 people standing against an entire machine of war, and neither of them would back. Down. More mercenaries poured through the breach. Chun's voice cracked over the comms. We're out of time, Sarge. They're pushing us into a corner. Jake scanned the room, assessing their dwindling options. We need to fall back to the east hallway. Use the corridors to bottleneck. Them move. He grabbed Lyeli's arm, pulling her toward the rear exit as Martinez hurled a fragmentation charge, the explosion buying them precious seconds. The 4 of them sprinted down the smoke-filled corridor, footsteps pounding on metal. The sounds of pursuit close behind Dot as they reached the next junction. Lyeli slowed, her armor's glow dimming. Wait, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. If we keep running, they'll trap us. We must turn and break their momentum. Jake hesitated for a split second, then nodded. Fine, one last stand. They took position at the corridor choke point, flanked by shattered doors and collapsed debris. Jake's heart pounded, the weight of every decision pressing down on him. He glanced at Lyeli, and for a fleeting moment, the battlefield noise fell away. "You know," he said, his tone almost wry despite the situation, "when I pulled you out of that rubble, I didn't think I'd end up fighting a small war with you." Lyeli's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "And when you saved me, I didn't think I'd be fighting alongside a human who refuses to give up. Perhaps that's why I trust you." The sound of mercenaries approaching snapped them back into focus. Jake tightened his grip on his rifle. "When this is over, if we make it out, I think I'll need to ask you what it means to be a queen who fights like a soldier." Lyeli's eyes gleamed, the patterns on her skin flickering with a mix of determination and something softer. "If we survive, Jake Sullivan, I'll tell you everything, but for now hold the line." The first mercenary squad rounded the corner, and the hallway exploded into gunfire and light. Jake and Lyeli moved like a single unit, her energy beams slicing through armor as his rifle dropped target after target. The narrow corridor turned the enemy's numbers against them, forcing them into the crossfire. Still, the pressure was relentless. A plasma bolt clipped Jake's shoulder, spinning him into the wall. He bit back a cry, his armor hissing from the heat. Lyeli was at his side instantly, her hand steady on his arm. "You're hurt." "I'm fine," he grunted, forcing himself. "Back up. We don't stop now." The enemy push slowed, their advance faltering under the combined fury of human and Katherian firepower. Then suddenly a new sound rose above the chaos voices, shouting commands in a strange mix of human English and Katherian tongue. Jake risked a glance around the corner. Soldiers both human and Katherian were moving in together, side by side, engaging the mercenaries. For a heartbeat, Jake couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. They heard the broadcast. Lyeli whispered, awe flickering across her face. "They're choosing peace over orders." The mercenaries faltered, their disciplined assault unraveling under the combined might of two forces they had never expected to fight as one. Jake lowered his rifle slightly, his breath ragged. "Looks like we might just live to see what peace looks like." Lyeli stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm with deliberate tenderness, her voice soft but unyielding. "Whatever that peace becomes, Jake Sullivan, I want you to help me build it." He looked at her, seeing not just a queen, not just an alien leader, but a partner who had fought for something bigger than either of them. "Count me in," he said, his voice rough but sure, "because I'm not done saving you yet." The last of the mercenaries fell, and the smoke cleared to reveal the impossible, a ceasefire forming in real time. Soldiers from both species lowering their weapons and nodding to each other. For the first time in years, the air felt lighter. Jake stood beside Lyeli, their shoulders brushing, as if both of them understood that this moment was only the beginning of something far greater than the war that had brought them together. The space station known as Harmony Point hung in orbit like a beacon between worlds, its vast hull glowing with soft pulses of light that mirrored the stars beyond. 6 months had passed since Vidia 4, but the memory of that battlefield remained, etched in Jake Sullivan's mind-smoked blood, and the moment when a human soldier and a Katherian queen stood shoulder to shoulder to change the fate of their peoples. Now, as he stood on the observation deck, the war-torn planet was nothing more than a distant scar, barely visible against the black canvas of space. Below, the docking bays of Harmony Point bustled with activity. Ships from 17 different species, once enemies, now arrived in cautious waves to discuss trade agreements, ceasefire terms, and rebuilding efforts. The hum of alien languages blended with human voices, filling the station with a sense of unsteady hope. "You're early," said a familiar voice behind him, melodic and warm. Queen Lyeli Kathandra stepped onto the deck, her presence commanding even in the diplomatic attire she now wore. Her flowing garments shimmered faintly, threaded with living light, a reminder of the organic technology her people wielded. Yet, despite her regal bearing, She moved with the same warrior's grace Jake had seen on Vidia 4. Couldn't sleep, Jake admitted, watching a group of young recruits, human and Catherian, work side by side on a maintenance scaffold. Guess I still expect someone to start shooting any second. Lyeli joined him at the viewport, her golden eyes reflecting the endless night. Peace is never quiet at first. It feels unnatural after years of war. It feels fragile. Jake turned to her, taking in the faint luminescent patterns that traced her cheekbones when she was deep in thought. "But it's holding," he said softly, "because of you." Lyeli's lips curved into a small smile. "Because of us. You, me, and every soldier who put down their weapon after that broadcast." She paused, her tone thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you had left me on that battlefield?" "All the time," Jake said. "Not because I regret it, but because I know how easily we could have lost this chance. Saving you. That was supposed to be just another rescue, but it turned into everything." She looked at him for a long moment, and for once, her royal composure softened. "When you saved me, you didn't see a queen. You saw someone who needed help. That is the kind of strength my people had forgotten to value." Before Jake could respond, the station comms chimed with the arrival of a new delegation. The Andromedan fleet, a mysterious crystalline species, had come to discuss their role in the coalition. Lyeli straightened, slipping back into her role as a leader, but not before brushing her hand against Jake's, a small gesture of closeness that spoke volumes. Hours later, after the formal meetings, Jake found himself on one of the stations. Inner Gardens. The place was a marvel, human engineering fused with Catherian bioluminescent flora, creating a space that felt like a living symbol of peace. Lyeli met him there, holding a data tablet filled with reports from the latest border negotiations. "We've secured a trade route through the neutral sectors," she said, setting the tablet down. "But I think the real progress isn't in the contracts or the meetings." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Then where is it?" "In the small things," Lyeli replied, gesturing to the garden where human children played alongside Catherian youths, their laughter blending in perfect harmony. Children who will grow up without hating someone just because of their species. That is what we're building here. Jake smiled, but there was still a shadow behind his eyes. "It feels too good, you know? Like we've won a battle, but the war could still find a way to crawl back." Lyeli nodded, stepping closer. "That is why we cannot just stop at peace. We must build trust. We must build us." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Jake felt his chest tighten. "Us?" he asked, his voice quieter. "You and I," she said, her golden gaze unwavering. "We've proven that humans and Catherians can fight together, bleed together, survive together. But what we share, it's more than politics, isn't it?" Jake didn't hesitate. "No, it's not politics. It's real." He took her hand, feeling the warmth beneath her shimmering skin. "When I carried you off that battlefield, I didn't know it would lead to all this. But now, I can't imagine doing any of this without you." Lyeli's pattern shifted across her skin, glowing softly like sunrise. "Then stay with me, Jake Sullivan. Not just as a soldier or advisor. Stay with me as my partner. In diplomacy, in life." For a moment, the chaos of war, the weight of responsibility, all of it melted away. Jake dropped to one knee, not out of formality, but out of instinct. "Lyeli," he said, using the name she had allowed only him to speak. "Would you do me the honor of being my partner in all of this? For as long as we both breathe?" Her smile was radiant, and she knelt to meet him. "You saved your queen," she whispered. "And you have her heart." "Yes, Jake Sullivan, always." 2 years later, Harmony Point had transformed from a neutral zone into a thriving hub of diplomacy and unity. The observation deck overlooked a docking bay where ships from over 20 species worked. together as if war had never been their language. On the deck stood Jake, now wearing the insignia of the human Catherian Peace Corps, and Lyeli, visibly pregnant, her hand resting lightly on her growing belly. Their adopted daughter, a bright-eyed human war orphan, ran past them, laughing. As she chased a group of Catherian children, the sight made Jake's throat tighten with a quiet, grateful emotion. "She's adapting well," Jake said softly, "to all of this." Lyeli's eyes softened as she watched the children play. "She's proof that a future built on love and trust is stronger than any treaty." Jake slipped an arm around her waist. "And what about our future?" Lyeli smiled. "It grows stronger every day." As Harmony Point drifted through the stars, carrying its fragile coalition of former enemies, Jake realized that their greatest victory hadn't been the defeat of an army or the signing of a peace accord. It was the decision, made in the ashes of Vidia 4, to save a life instead of taking it. That single act had rewritten the destiny of two civilizations. "Come on," Jake said, taking Lyeli's hand. "We've got a future to build." And as they walked forward together, the stars seemed to burn just a little brighter, as if even the universe recognized the power of what they had created. Not just peace, but something far stronger, hope.